It's getting late, so let's conclude today's training. We have the reports and then a wrap-up. So this legend Kyron creates for us, and it really succinctly shows the relationships of the reports and which ones are aggregate and supporting reports. Remember that the aggregate reports are, when I like to say, the product, because this is what the CDE wants. The CDE derives the information from the aggregate reports to report to the federal government. They're just counts. They're just numerical counts of students in any category, right? But the supporting reports and aggregate reports are those that have to be reviewed in CalPads, right? You have to get that green check mark to certify. The supporting reports provide all the detail. You cannot make sense out of the aggregate reports without reviewing the supporting reports. And so most of you here have been trying to make a deadline, clicking reports, and okay, it looks good, it looks good, it looks good, right? Just a quick review. But you really don't get the value of any of this data. You really can't make any changes or any plans without looking at the supporting reports to make sure that the aggregate counts are reasonable, right? So one of the reasons why you want to certify early is you want to be able to review the reports and make sure that the data is reported accurately and that it represents the decisions made within the school district. So when you talk about behavioral incidents and you realize that, all the kids at school A are getting suspended where all the other schools have less suspensions, you want to look at that administration and question, right? Are these kids really worse than the other kids, or are we making not the best decisions or decisions not in the best interest of the students? And the arrows on this show you the relationship. So report 14.1, student absenteeism count, will drill down directly to the student list. And so again, to emphasize the value of the supporting reports, you see student list. All of these reports predominantly give you more detail because they list the student, their details, their demographics, so on and so forth, as opposed to just a count. So the incident information for the Individuals with Disability Education Act, the whole reason why your SELPA gets involved, your data coordinator gets involved, is listed here, right? And it comes from these three reports in the corner, 7.16, 17, and 18. Those reports provide the count of students with disabilities removed from an interim alternative educational setting, the count of students with disabilities unilaterally removed from school by personnel not on the IEP team. It also provides the count of students with disabilities suspended or expelled and the duration of that disciplinary action, unduplicated count of students with disabilities subject to any kind of disciplinary removal. So not just suspensions and expulsions or those that are related to offenses. And then the total number of times these students were subject to any kind of disciplinary removal. So duplicated count, but also a duplicated count is available. So report 1.21 cumulative enrollment, again, is the basis for all those calculations the CDE derives of your student population that have rate. Right? In the denominator is the cumulative enrollment. So suspension rate, chronic absenteeism rate, that's pretty straightforward because that data comes from CalPads. But things like truancy, the rate part of it, they're still using the cumulative enrollment account from CalPads. Although we don't look at attendance and absence for truancy in CalPads, that rate, that cumulative enrollment number is used. Graduation rates. So that cumulative enrollment is important. And to my knowledge, it's the default cumulative enrollment, not the adjusted cumulative enrollment. And then report 1.22 graduates and completers. It's a count of your 1 year grads and completers. So when I say 1 year, it's just those students who graduated this year. Remember, the cohort report is the result of the 4-year window determining factor in the cohort is when those students enter your ninth grade entry year. If a student graduates late or early, they're in this report and may not necessarily be in your cohort count. So, it took me probably like 8 years to graduate high school. I would have been represented in this report as a graduate eventually, but on my cohort report, I would have been in a different bucket. So, there you go. 1.23 graduates and completers student list. It's the supporting report to the cohort report. So you can see you just have counts here. Here you have the student's name, some demographic information, student subgroups and programs that they were a part of. And then ultimately, you can see your exit reason and completion status, right? And so you know that the exit reason and completion status will determine if they're a graduate or a different completer. And so if you have a student that's reported as a completer that you think is a graduate, you can see the reason why here. This is how you reconcile the counts by identifying student data elements from the supporting reports. And report 2.16, English language status ELs reclassified. This is just the count of the students that were ARF this year. It's been mentioned that, pay particular attention to those students that reclassify over the summer, because that reclassification status date has to fall in line with the period of enrollment. So this is how you would look at the counts and say, hey, wait, we got about 6 students at Vista Del Mar Middle who are unaccounted for. And you would look at the date. And if you see it's between June and July, you should look at the student record in CalPass to see when they were exited from school. And then you would say, oh, my word, they were all exited on 5/30 and the RFEP status is 6/15. Let's change that status date to match the last day of school. And then you'd review the reports and see they were included. This is the student list that would help identify those students very quickly. You can download the reports in this format or as a CSV and import them into Excel, but either way, you can filter for status date and make sure, any student between July and August and June, if they were exited, show up on and are counted on 2/16. Then you have report 5.4, homeless students enrolled. The expectation is this report should have more students than the ones in fall 1, because this would count a student that was homeless at any time in the year. For fall 1, you had to be homeless over the course of census day. So this is where you account for your students. It also has a supporting report. I don't want to go over that prompt right there. Then we have our incident reports. 7.10 incident count, right? We'll look at this report and come back to it later. It's the count of incidents. I kind of belabored the point earlier on, and it's because these particular reports are not necessarily straightforward for how I find the data is used by personnel at the school district and LEAs like you, right? So again, this is a count of the different incidents. If you want a count of just the different incidents, this is a great report. It has information about the incident results, like incidents that involve suspension or in-school suspension, expulsion, the other type of results, whether they're discipline or restraint, right? Incident results count. Again, just a count of how many different results there were, right? So you may only have 3 incidents and students may have multiple results. So of your 3 incidents, you might have 9 results. Who knows, right? So if you want a count of different results, here you go. And then you have 7.12 incident results student list. This is the detailed report. This report provides you a lot more useful information, in my opinion, because it provides you the student, the incident they were involved in, the date, they committed offense or not, what offense it was, if it was multiple offenses, what the results were. If there were multiple results, if there was a single result, if there was a weapon involved. This is the incident results list. 712. Then you have student offense count by offense. So this is a count of all the different offenses, right? Again, a student may have multiple offenses for a single incident. So this is just a count of the different offenses. 7.14 incident offense student list. This is a more detailed report. You can see the relationship between the incident and the offense on this report. So when you're considering the information you need and how it's related, if you need not just a count of different offenses, but if you want to understand why or when the offense occurred, the supporting report, the one that is not certified, probably provides that information. 715 incident results persistently dangerous school. Persistently dangerous schools are required by UMERS. Those offenses that are violent and involved weapons. So that's what these offense codes pertain to. These are the more violent offenses. And then you have so many offenses for every 100 students. If your school exceeds a certain number, it will have a yes here. And that's a persistently dangerous school. So I think Marshall told me once he went to the School of Hard Knocks. I think that is a persistently dangerous school. He might have been talking about the song, though. I'm not sure. And then you have report 7.16, incident restraints, seclusion, and removals for students with disabilities, right? And so, again, the key here is students with disabilities. This report, I don't want to say you should provide it because honestly, your SEDS data coordinator should have the roles to access this report and they should know to come here. But you have that conversation, make sure that they realize this is what I need you to review so we can certify end of year 3. This is what the CELP is going to review. Likewise, 7.17 unilateral removals for students with disabilities count. Again, this is a report for your special education department. And 7.18 incident removals for students with disabilities. And this is what they would use. If they look at these two reports and have questions, direct them to 7.18. Right? And this information does come from the student information system. I don't know if it's kept locally in the SED system as well, but if they have questions about these different codes and disciplinary incidents, they may also need access to your student system. So before we leave the behavioral incident set of reports, I do want to go back to 7.12. And so I've answered tickets over the years where the count of suspensions is what the school district wants. Where do I find a count of suspensions, right? You notice that nowhere here do we have just a plain count of suspensions. Instinctively, you would want to come to 7.10 because there's a whole column, incidents involving suspension and in-house suspension. It's a count of incident, not a count of suspensions, right? And if you're unfamiliar with the supporting reports, you only look at the aggregate reports, you won't know the data here, right? And so you do have to export this report either in an Excel format, as it is shown here, or you can export it as a .csv format, import it into Excel. After that, it gives you greater flexibility because you don't have the formatting restrictions. Either way you do it is fine because you can filter the incident result only for codes 100 or 110 or both, and that will be all your suspensions. And even if a student was suspended multiple times, this is a count of every result. So then you can scroll down, see what the count of suspensions were, or expulsions, or any other kind of disciplinary measure. The other thing we want to emphasize is, these reports are made for reporting accountability requirements. I went to the School of Bad English and Grammar, but the data is there. And if you don't have a method of extracting the data you want from your student information system, you can manipulate the CalPAS reports. It does take a little bit of practice with other tools, maybe Excel, Notepad, but the data is there. And so if you can't find what you're looking for through the reports, submit a question. We've probably heard it before and we can help you, right? If it seems like it should be there and it's not presented in a nice, convenient format in the CalPAS reports, just don't be scared to ask the question. when we typically try to find a way, sometimes the information may not be there, right? But don't fear. We have a lot of practice going through these reports and trying to find data that's not necessarily used for reporting for CalPADS purposes. And then 8.1, it's the most detailed report we have for our students. The end of year 3 version specifically is used to support cumulative enrollment. The information really will show you your students, your homeless students, students who are enrolled at any time. If they exited, that information is on there. So it really supports the end of year 3 data collection as a whole. 14.1, student absenteeism. So here you can see the report. Understanding what it tells you is kind of important as well, right? So we have these different buckets. And we know that a student is defined as chronically absent if they're absent 10% or more of the time. So, these last 2 buckets are going to be the group of chronically absent students. And so this would be the count, 14 and 16, right? That would be your count of students who were going to appear on the dashboard, with one caveat. And to see that, you have to go to report 14.2. The column has changed in name, but it means the same thing. Students enrolled less than 30 days do not show up on the dashboard. CalPADS will show you the students who are chronically absent, but if they are enrolled less than 30 days, they have a Y indicator. Those students are not going to show up in the dashboard calculations. We come over here, and earlier in the chat was a question about days and how they counted. So you go to the reports to find out those calculations. This is the supporting report. And as you go through the columns, the calculation. So if you want to find out which days count as absent, right? C, E, F, and G, right? And so you come up here and you see C, E, F, and G. Also, the numerical equivalent is put there to help map. And so that was added there. And then the definition, calculation, days absent. It tells you the specific days that count as absent. So that's, when you're trying to determine the information on the reports, that's one of the use of the data report mapping guides, is it will tell you how the calculations go. Also, the report mapping guides will tell you the students included on the report. So if you were wondering where your secondary enrolled students were or where your non-ADA enrollments, you can see the report is only going to include primary enrollments and short-term enrollments, as well as grade level. More qualifying data is listed here. So that's one of the values of the mapping guides. So just a reminder what the data is used for: ESSA, every student succeeds at, McKinney-Vento, right? Identify homeless students and make sure they have an equitable education, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, public-facing websites and documents in the dashboard and DataQuest reports. It's used to determine your chronic absenteeism rate. It's also used to determine your suspension rate. Both are state indicators on the dashboard. So there's a lot of value in the reports. End of year 3 is the largest data collection. We can only encourage you to, certify end of year 3 in advance of the July 28 deadline, so that there's adequate time to examine the reports for reasonability and completeness.